I read this definition recently, and I'd like to get your thoughts on it. And this was from a book about economics, but also from a physics lens, which I think is a very important connection between two domains. But like you said earlier, they're not the same, right? There's physics, which has these constants we can create formulas and things about, but social sciences are different. We can't formulaically describe what an individual or individuals are going to do. So this book defined life as an open system in a thermodynamic sense, which imports energy and exports entropy. Mm-hmm. And I was reminded here of there's an old G.K. Chesterton quote that says, "A dead thing can go with the stream, but only a living thing can go against it." Yeah. So what is the relationship, if any, worth talking about, between life and entropy? And it may help to define entropy here too. I think it's one of the most ill understood words in the world. Sure. But something I think that my intuition tells me it's very important, but even I don't really understand what entropy is fully yet.
Yeah, so I think even in my book, I talk about this some. I talk about entropy, and I talk about it within the context of something that has been, I don't know, very deep interest of mine for a very long time, and in fact was something that got me interested in all these questions, and the shift from sort of being a physicist interested in dark matter and string theory, quarks and gluons, to thinking about life, so to speak. And that is the whole question of aging and death, aging and mortality. It's always been something that has sort of maybe morbidly fascinated me, but it became more and more interesting, of course, as I got older and began to realize that I was facing my own mortality. And I think in my book, I said, life is a continuous fight against entropy. Mm-hmm. Because, as you say, as that definition says, it's a very limited definition, but it's a crucial aspect of life. So let me back off a second, because you asked the question about what is entropy. And there is a precise mathematical definition within, the whole physics canon. But loosely speaking, it's that if you use energy, well, you have to use energy. When you use energy to create order, so you make a cell, you make an automobile, you make an iPhone, whatever. If you use energy, which you have to do to make that, then inevitably you create some disorder. You cannot do it with, so to speak, 100% efficiency. Or disorder is an inevitable outcome. So in a certain sense, just to give an example, we're worried about pollution in the environment and so on, the effects on the environment of the marvelous things we've done in creating our cities and our socioeconomic system. And the point is, you can't, that's inevitable. It's inevitable that we're going to create pollution, and we're going to have potentially deleterious effects on the environment. The big question is, how do you minimize that? How do you minimize it? Because even if you use energy to mitigate the damage you've done, in correcting it, you still create entropy. Right. So you're always going to be creating this thing so this disorder is called entropy. And there is a precise definition, as I said, but loosely speaking, that's what it is. So going back to life, and in fact, that G.K. Chesterton quote, it is that when the way we stay alive is through metabolism. That is, we eat and we extract metabolic energy from the food we eat by oxidizing it. And that's our respiratory system. And that feeds our cells, and coherently that keeps us alive. But in so doing, we create entropy. And we do it inevitably by damaging ourselves in various ways. I mean, in our terms, just in creating something called ATP, which is the highly complex molecule, which is your currency of energy. It's sort of your dollar's worth of energy that every cell is creating ATP, and that's what you use in order to stay alive through oxidative respiration. And but the chemical process in so doing creates these, these oxygen molecules, and they can damage your cells. So even though that's keeping you alive, it's also, in a certain sense, destroying you. And in this, and even more explicitly, that energy has to be distributed throughout your body. And one of the primary systems is your circulatory system, your cardiovascular system. I mean, the whole point of that is just the whole point of blood and sending it through the network of your cardiovascular system is to carry oxygen and other nutrients to the cells. And of course, that's what it does. But in so doing, in so keeping you alive, that blood is flowing through tubes. And of course, it's wearing them out. I mean, you create wear and tear, just as your, water running in the pipes of your house eventually creates problems. And of course, you do repair yourself, but that wear and tear is entropy production. And so you have to repair that as well as you can, but eventually entropy wins. Entropy overtakes, because the more and more you're having to supply energy to do those repairs, and as they pile up, you can't afford to do it. Otherwise, you'd have to. It's like it's in that sense, we're like a machine. It is like having a car, and you can, you take your car in for maintenance, change the oil and the filters and all the rest of that stuff. And, you can do it according to the schedule in the handbook, but you know damn well that after 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, depending on the car and how much you use it, that car's going to fall apart. And the only way you can keep that car going is either not to drive it very often, which is the case of antique automobiles, or you could, every time you drive it, repair it. Every time you go out, and of course, the cost of that is totally prohibitive.
Right.
And much better that you drive it and then buy a new one after 5 years or 10 years or 2, whatever it is that you do. And in a weird way, there's an analog that in nature. Better to let us wear ourselves out and produce new ones, which is what, of course, life does. So I'm taking liberties with my analogies, but that's sort of what's happening, and that's what entropy is. And entropy is absolutely central to, especially to living systems, because living systems are, first of all, creating order, because you have to build up this extraordinary system that is our bodies, but then you have to maintain it. And it is maintaining it is fighting entropy.
Interesting. Wow.
And by the way, there's analogies, I think, in cities and companies to that.
I agree completely. You know exactly where I'm going with this, perhaps. Before we go there, so out of my own curiosity, order and disorder, then, are these relative terms, or are these, I guess, mathematically or definable with mathematical precision? And what I'm thinking of here is, I've read some texts that describe uncertainty as entropy as well. This might be connected to Maxwell's demon, the thought experiment with that. So, and the question here, like the way I'm thinking about this, okay, if we know, for instance, one guy knows Halley's Comet comes around once every 75 years or whatever it is, but someone else doesn't. Well, the guy that knows sees Halley's Comet and he has no new information, right? It's like he expected that already. The guy that didn't know, it's a surprise. So
exactly.
I guess, what is the relationship between entropy and uncertainty? And then as a follow on to that, is entropy actually everywhere, Or is it just within networks, as you described, that it's wear and
Oh,
tear
no.
within networks?
Yes, entropy is everywhere. I mean, entropy is, it's an integral part. It's sort of like energy is everywhere, because entropy is energy. It's creating, and maybe I should stress this. It's entropy is, as I say, I associate it with disorder, which means it's sort of like useless energy. It's sort of like, friction. Friction is one of the best examples. You create heat, and mostly you can't use it. I mean, it's, when you rub something, it creates that heat, which sort of dissipates. And so it is everywhere, and it's mostly not useful energy. And one of the things, in terms of engineering, is to find ways, of course, to try to make that what appears to be dissipated, not useful energy into something useful. And of course, in terms of trying to, I mean, for example, a trivial example is when you drive your car, it creates heat. That's why the engine runs hot. That's entropy. The engine's running hot. But one of the engineering things that takes advantage of that is to keep you warm inside on your seat. I mean, you use that heat that's generated by the engine, which will go to sort of just out there into the atmosphere. You have to, I mean, of course, it costs you to do that, but it is one way of trying to control entropy. Now, your first question is sort of a tangent to this, to do with information. There's another use of the word entropy to describe a degree of information. And it turns out that the mathematics of that, and what you know and what you don't know, and how you can define the number of bits and so on, the mathematics of that is essentially identical to the mathematics of sort of thermal entropy, heat entropy, and energetic entropy. And so you have to be careful that they don't get conflated. But there are bridges between them. But in the sort of things that I've been interested in, that plays much less of a role than the physical entropy, the original meaning of entropy that was introduced, when people were trying to understand, developing the theory of thermodynamics. And by the way, one of the other things maybe I should have said about entropy, the second law, what's called the second law of thermodynamics, is what I said earlier, is the inevitability of creating entropy. And the second law is very simply stated: in a closed system, so a closed system, entropy always increases.
Right.
That's the statement. And
can we define, sorry, just for the audience, open versus closed system in thermodynamics?
Yes. So a closed system literally means, you can imagine there's some boundary, a box, some encasement, and no more energy comes in and out of that. I mean, in principle, that's the idea, that there's something that it's closed and it's within the system. So everything stays within the system. Because, so for example, and a fantastic example of it is, of course, the planet. We are not a closed system. We're an open system because the sun is shining on us, giving us energy all the time. And one of the problems we face in terms of our long-term future on the planet, and one of the problems with having exploited fossil fuels, which has given rise to this extraordinary society we live in, the discovery and exploitation and the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, was that instead of the planet functioning entirely as an open system. That is, we as human beings, let alone the rest of the biosphere, were getting our energy primarily from the sun, so that we were in this open system, whether we were hunter-gatherers or whether we were agriculturalists. That energy was giving rise to growth of agricultural products that sustained us. But that was coming, the energy for that was primarily coming from the outside. We changed to making it what was effectively a closed system. That is the burning of fossil fuel, because we're just simply burning the surface of the planet. That's what we've been doing. And we've done that extraordinarily well. But we're paying a price for it, because that means that we've enhanced tremendously the production of entropy. And that production of entropy is deleterious in terms of the environment and ourselves and so on. So that's the big issue. That's sort of the big picture way of thinking about it. But it is the difference between a closed and an open system.
Very interesting there. I had never thought about it. So the shift from, let's just say, the agricultural age to the industrial age, for instance, we went from living off of flows of energy, which is like the sunlight falling on the earth. I guess it was somewhat being accumulated as a stock in the agriculture.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, it's not entirely, obviously it wasn't entirely open, clearly.
But the industrial age took us deep into stock. We started living off hydrocarbons. Right.